Welcome to the Grow Down on Soil Health. I'm your host, Dr. Ben West, Executive Director of Farmers for Soil Health, and we're joined today by someone many of you probably already know, Dr. Wayne Honeycutt. Wayne helped launch the Soil Health Institute, where he's been the founding CEO since its inauguration 10 years ago, and he's been in that role ever since. Recently, he announced he's going to be retiring and heading off to greener pastures and handing off the reins for the Soil Health Institute to a new leader. He spent his career focused on the one thing, the foundation of agriculture, and that's soil and building healthier soils. And Wayne, I've been looking forward to this podcast. You and I started getting to know each other 3 years or so ago when Farmers for Soil Health got started. I knew you by name, but have really enjoyed getting to know you, and just really looking forward to the conversation today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure, and I'm looking forward to the conversation too.
I think, Wayne, maybe the first conversation you and I had, I learned that we shared a common passion, and that is for the magical liquid called bourbon. You're a bourbon fan.
Yeah, but I also want to tell you that I come by it honestly. Apparently, well, not only am I from Kentucky, but I love white oak trees, but where what really kind of boils down to is that apparently I've always been told when I was a baby that my grandmother would put bourbon in my bottle to make me sleep. And so that's my excuse.
Yeah, well, it's a pretty good one. It does go deep. I love good bourbon. What are you drinking these days, by the way? What's your new favorite bottle?
I'll always like to point out it's only in moderation.
Of course.
And safely and all those things. I'm mostly drinking a Woodford Reserve, and that's just occasional, like I say, but that's kind of a standby that's available, but that's of high quality.
Yeah, I like Woodford. I like the double oaked version of Woodford Reserve. I got into bourbon in the early 2000s. Around 2004, I was a faculty member at Mississippi State University and had a group of guy friends, and we started doing things together. And one of the first significant thing we did was we went on a 4-day trip on the Bourbon Trail. Wow. This is 2004, Wayne. And if you go back, if you look at global bourbon sales, it started increasing rapidly around 2004 and 5. Before 2005, the most popular liquors on the market were clear liquors, vodka, gin, like they really dominated the market. Brown liquors, bourbon particularly, were not that popular. They started spiking then, and it's just exploded. The bourbon industry has exploded. But 2004, it was still kind of people drank bourbon, but it was kind of niche. I don't have many regrets in life, but I want to tell you about one that involves bourbon, but not in the way you're probably thinking. 2004, I go on the Bourbon Trail with a group of guy friends, and we spend 4 days going to distilleries. And back in those days, you could walk into any distillery. You didn't have to have an appointment. Like it wasn't a destination the way it is now. So we spent time in that bourbon distilling part of Kentucky, going to distilleries and tasting bourbons. I tasted more bourbons in 4 days than I had in my 35 years before that. And it's just fascinated by the whole thing, and fascinated by the distilling techniques, and fascinated by how like small changes led to really different flavors in the bourbon. And my moment of regret came looking back on it. After the trip, we get up on Sunday morning. So we've been drinking bourbon for 3 or 4 days. The last thing any of us wanted to do was to have another drink of bourbon.
It sounds like you needed to go to church that day.
That's right. We that was not my regret, but it probably should have been. But we were sitting there having breakfast, about to depart, and one of the guys in our group, he's the guy in the group who always had weird ideas. Sometimes they were brilliant, sometimes they were stupid, and he threw out an idea at the time we thought was stupid. But it turns out it was brilliant, and it was a huge missed opportunity. We were sitting there talking about the trip and about everything we had seen, and his name is Briar. And Briar said, "Hey, guys, I know what we need to do." And we said, "What's that, Briar?" He said, "We're going to go home, and we're going to cash out every investment account, every retirement account. We're going to get our hands on every dollar that we can. And we're going to come back here, and we're going to spend a week, and we're going to go buy every bottle of Pappy Van Winkle that we could find. Because at that time, you could walk into any liquor store and there would be bottles of 20-year-old Pappy for $150. He's like, we're going to go buy all this, and it's going to be our retirement plan. And we all looked at each other and looked at him and said, Briar, that's the dumbest idea we've ever heard. Wayne, if I'd done that, I'd be retired today. Because those bottles of Pappy Van Winkle today are selling for $3,000 or $4,000 a bottle.
Wow.
Yes, what has happened in bourbon is crazy.
Way too rich for my blood, But obviously, your investment would have only worked if you set it aside and did not partake of it. Well, so he may have also saved you by not doing it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. If you drank all your investment, it would not. Yeah. It would not have led to.
Right.
Yeah. Well, so you grew up in Kentucky. So,
I did.
So tell me a little bit about your background. What is a younger person led you into the career you're in, an interest in soil health and agriculture?
It was kind of a circular route, I grew up in a small town called Glasgow, Kentucky. It's kind of down near Mammoth Cave National Park. My father was a high school band director, a musician, but he also had an interest in farming. And so he bought 40 acres in the next county over. Couldn't afford it in our county. Went over where soils are a bit poorer. In the next county over, got 40 acres. And this is when I was just a little kid. And as I grew up, I started working with him more and more on it. And then he purchased an adjoining 80. So we had 120 acres. And so I started going into business with him, raising tobacco, corn, gardens, things like this. And I just got a real appreciation for what it takes when a person puts their hands in the ground and just puts so much blood, sweat, and tears into farming, how that piece of land kind of really becomes part of them. So that's just something that just really carried through for me, and it just helped me really gain such a respect for those that make a living off the farm. Because again, my father was a high school band director, so we did not have to depend on the farm for our living. And so that's how I just kind of really got started in it, learning from it and recognizing so many things that I did not know.
Your dad was a high school band director. Do you play an instrument? Are you musical?
Well, I didn't practice enough to become very good at it. So I kind of took the easy route out and would do singing because I didn't have to practice very much. Yeah. And so I did quite a bit of that, but there is, musicality in the family. My son is actually a musician for the U.S. Navy Band.
Oh, wow.
And so, so it's there. But I took kind of the easy route on instruments. I did play some instruments, but I went to
musicians like really talented musicians are the closest thing to magic that I know. Like what a person can do with like a guitar, like a great guitar player, it just amazes me. I can't even fathom what it takes to get there because I love music. I listen to music all the time, but I'm not musically inclined. I always it'd be great to learn to play the guitar, but I finally realized I'm never going to because of an interview I watched 3 or 4 years ago. You know the musician Jason Isbell?
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So is known as a great guitar player. And I saw an interview with him one time, and he was asked by the interviewer, do you think your guitar playing, is it innate? Is it God-given, or is it something you worked at? And he said, man, it sure doesn't feel like it was innate because I have worked really hard to be a good guitar player. He's like, what might be innate is I have the personality. I can go into a room and play the guitar for 12 hours. Yeah. And I just got this obsession with getting, to do the same thing over and over again. Yeah. And I don't think I have that. I don't think I've got that ability.
Yeah. Well, a musician will tell you that there are 3 ways that you become really good at it. It's practice.
That's right.
Practice.
That's right.
That's what it takes.
Yeah, and I always say the best thing that can happen to a young person is to have a really crappy job early in life. And I had a really crappy job. I worked at a grocery. It was crappy to me. I worked at a grocery store, and the reason I hated it was the same thing. Yeah. So over and over, and I realized I got to do something that's different every day. Yeah. So the idea of going into a room and learning to play the same chord for weeks on end, I just don't think it fits.
Well, that kind of relates to some of my experience too, because I was laying carpet for minimum wage with a master's degree in soils.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's what really inspired me to go back for my Ph.D., because I realized that, that was the only thing I'd been really very good at so far in my life, was going in school. And so I went back to school at that point with a master's degree, laying carpet for minimum wage.
Yeah. So you grew up connection agriculture, got interested in this.
Yeah.
But where did the specific interest in soils come from? And did you get a bachelor's degree in soil science?
My bachelor's was in forestry, but as part of the curriculum was to take an introductory soils course. So I took that, and I just really got intrigued by it and really drawn in by it. And so I decided at that point to minor in soils with my forestry degree, so that I had like 15 hours of soils background. And so with a bachelor's degree in forestry, there were no job opportunities, but I had one professor that said, hey, I do have an opportunity to get a master's degree in forest soils. And so he gave me that opportunity and on an assistantship. And so I did that. And, that was kind of one of those really watershed moments too, because that particular project, I was looking at the growth of white oak trees and their relationship to different soil properties and site properties, and traveled all over eastern Kentucky, sometimes in a Korean War surplus Jeep, out in the woods where you basically know good roads, and just getting out and measuring white oak trees and taking note of all the vegetation and digging holes and looking at the soils. And what really struck me was, after doing that for 2 or 3 months, I realized all of a sudden that I understood that ecosystem. And I could, just by walking and without even digging a hole, I could tell what soil was going to be underneath my feet. And it's because I could see the changes in the vegetation, and I understood how that relationship to those soils, or how those plants were growing and which plants were growing there, which trees were growing there, all that, that relationship that is that ecosystem. And so I would still dig a hole every now and then, but it was, it was always right. I understood it. So that was one of those days that I remember so well. Decades and decades ago, it was like somebody pouring a bucket of water over me, that I understood that ecosystem. And so at that point, I was just hooked on understanding soils and their relationships, to the plants that are growing there and the broader environment.
It's always fascinating to me when I hear people talk about these little moments of their life that change everything. That come after. Most people have had those. And yours led you into a career in soil science. So you got a PhD in soils. What happened then?
So after getting a PhD in soils, the opportunity I had was to conduct research for USDA's Agriculture Research Service. And it was a USDA position, but on the University of Maine campus. So it was a wonderful place, to raise a family. It's a wonderful place for somebody like me who likes to get out fishing and hiking and all that type of stuff. And so I conducted research mostly on like nutrient cycling, nutrient availability, but then also just was given the opportunity to become the research leader of that facility in that place. So I was a research scientist for 14 years, a research leader for almost 11 years, I guess. And one of the kind of really eye-opening moments about some of that research was we were wondering, potatoes is really big in Maine. And so one of the projects we decided to try to answer, the questions we tried to answer was, what is it that's limiting potato yield? Is it the soil? Is it some disease? Is it water alone? What is it? Why have potato yields leveled off? And so we did a big study for several years, where we were removing those potential barriers. Like half of them were irrigated, half were not. Some of them we were growing cover crops and rotations that control diseases, stuff like that. And what we learned from that was that we could either double the yield of potatoes by either irrigating or by improving soil health. And once we improved soil health, we got no additional yield benefit from irrigation. And so that was one of those type of watershed moments, like, wow.
And when was that one?
There is
what
data.
year?
There is data here, that's scientifically valid, the way that it's all conducted, the way we've measured it, and the way we're reporting it. Oh, we were doing that from about 2004 to 2010, doing those studies. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
There's a reason I ask. I'll come back to that. But finish out your resume. So that was one of those things that just really kind of convinced me, once you see, as a scientist, you have the data, the importance of soil health. So I always wanted to do something bigger, have more impact. And I was always drawn not just to the science, but really getting into the hands of growers, people that would really benefit from that research. And so I always worked hard to kind of translate it and to get it out. And there was an opportunity position widely advertised and announced, being the deputy chief for science and technology for NRCS in Washington, D.C. And so I applied for it and was selected. So I did that for like 5.5 years. And in that role, one of the things we did was we established, I should say, a soil health division. To help more people at NRCS become acquainted with the soil health principles so they could work with farmers and bring soil health more to the forefront of USDA's programs. So I did that for 5.5 years. And when the Samuel Roberts Noble Foundation and Farm Foundation established the nonprofit Soil Health Institute in late 2015, I was invited to throw my name in the hat. So I threw my name in the hat, and it was picked. So I've been doing that ever since. Well, Wayne, there's so much you and I could talk about. These podcasts are usually 20, 30 minutes. I feel like this one will go on a couple of hours. Yeah. We won't go that long. But one of the topics I want to talk about is, it strikes me that, I went to college in the early 90s, and I had 3 soils classes, I guess. And at that time, at least my memory of it, and you tell me if this is correct, but at that time, my impression is soil scientists really thought about soils primarily through their physical and chemical qualities. Mm-hmm. That's what I was taught. Sand, silt, clay. All of that stuff. Almost no attention given to the biological qualities of soils, which seems to me the piece that was added to chemistry and physical qualities of soil to really define soil health. And you were a soil scientist. During that time, really influential soil scientists that really kind of pushed the field in that direction to thinking about soils more holistically and thinking about their biological qualities. Talk about that as a soil scientist and then administrator and leader during that time where we really shifted the way we think about soils. What happened during that time?
Yeah. I do think that there was a much broader recognition for that value and that importance of that biological component. So much of, we have gained a lot. Farmers have really benefited a lot. The world has benefited a lot from a lot of food production by focusing on the chemistry, like the fertilization. So we need to acknowledge that. But for improving soil health, and it's not just looking at one or the other, it's looking at all three, the chemical, physical, and biological. And I often ask farmers to consider themselves, for example, not just a corn soybean producer or a potato grower, but to consider themselves as a soil health manager. And because when they do that, then they realize that, well, I'm also kind of a livestock manager. They may not be above the ground, but they're microscopic livestock. And so I need to do what is required by them to give them food, to give them shelter, to nurture them. And that's because those microbes in the soil are the ones that are so key to providing so many things for plant growth. like for cycling nutrients in ways, that plants can now take them up. So for changing the physical aspects of the soil so that water infiltrates in instead of runs off, so that now there's more water there during the drought. And so those microbes play such key roles there. And so it's really kind of not one or the other, but it's kind of that that triumvirate of the chemical, physical, and the biological that are really all needed.
And our understanding of the biological is really advanced during your career. Over the course of your career, and this may be a tall order, but could you summarize in just a few sentences over your career, the last 30 years, what have we learned about biological qualities of soils that farmers should know and understand?
Yeah, I think that we have learned, for one thing, controlling diseases. There are certain things that you can do that will control pathogens that are born in the soil. There are like crops like canola, those types of brassicas. When they decomposed into substances that can naturally control some of those pathogens. So that's just one of the things. Just kind of enhancing the nutrient availability is another big one. And just in the most recent years, with the onset of really looking at what's called the microbiome, is really understanding like the DNA, using those DNA and RNA types of analyses to help you understand what is present in the soil. That was an initial big step. But kind of the limitation there is that even though you can determine what's present in the soil, it doesn't tell you very much about what they're doing. And so now the more recent tests are starting to provide insight into not just what particular microorganisms are in the soil, but what functions they're providing. And so I think in many respects, we are just getting started on that biological component. We've come a long way, but in many respects, I think that's a huge next frontier for the soil health movement.
Isn't it interesting that we have learned so much and we know so much more about soils than we did 30 years ago or 100 years ago, but there's still so much more to know. And I guess that's the piece that drew me to science. Is like, every time we learn something new, it opens the door to dozens of other questions.
Yeah. I just want to share with you, because this stirs up a memory, about what we've learned, more an appreciation for that biological component. There was an effort back in the 1990s, particular, of USDA. It's called soil quality. Mm-hmm. And it didn't really take hold. But back around 2010, 2012, that's when things first started again, kind of starting up again, but focusing on soil health. And it really resonated, I think, with farmers, and that's been part of the value of it. I was given a presentation in Paris, actually, and I was being challenged.
Paris, Tennessee?
Not Paris,
world
Kentucky.
Of the largest fish fry?
Paris, France.
Okay, yeah.
Think Eiffel Tower.
There is a Paris, Tennessee. Yeah. They do have a small Eiffel Tower.
Well, there's a Paris, Kentucky, too.
Yeah. And Paris, Tennessee is the home to the world's largest catfish fry.
Wow.
So we'll meet there sometime.
How can you beat that? Yeah, right.
Paris, France.
And so... now I'm losing my train of thought. I'm thinking of catfish fry. No, but so I was in this conference in Paris, France, and I was challenged because the folks there did not want us to call it soil health. They wanted us to call it soil security. And I told them, look, farmers are going to be the ones that make the difference. They're going to be the ones making the decisions on what management practices they're using that will bring all these environmental benefits like water quality and reduce greenhouse gases for all the rest of society. Farmers are interested in the term soil health. If farmers wanted us to call it pea soup, we should call it pea soup. but they want us to call it soil health, so that's what we're doing. And then I shared with them of being in an audience one time where people were arguing about the soil quality versus soil health, term. And one farmer said it best when he stood up and said, anything can have quality, but only living things can have health.
Oh, brilliant.
It was kind of those microphone drop moments.
Absolutely.
And the room went silent. And so that ties all back into this biological component. And that is, I think, also just kind of one of those key connections of looking at yourself not just as a corn soybean producer, but as a soil health manager and also as a livestock manager, thinking of that biological life and managing for its optimal activity.
Well, I remember that time well. I was a relatively new administrator for Extension and was working with a lot of people across a very broad cross section of agriculture. And when USDA NRCS really started promoting soil health and talking about it, obviously you were instrumental in that. You'd been a scientist, and then you were administrator for NRCS. Were really instrumental in the focus on soil health. I heard so many classically trained soil scientists and agronomists say, "Oh, this is a bunch of hooey, like that. This is some mumbo jumbo. This is going to be a fad." But man, it hasn't turned out to be a fad. It has turned out to be one of the most significant emerging issues in agriculture.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I was there, obviously, for those times and was challenged and welcomed the challenge and still do. It's interesting. I just came from giving a presentation here at the National No Tillage Conference. And I had showed a slide where there were side-by-side fields just on different sides of the fence, one of them in no-till and one of them that had been heavily tilled. After a heavy rain, the water had drained in on the no-till side, and but then the water was still ponded on the conventionally tilled side. And there's real good reasons for that I explained, what those reasons are. But I asked farmers, to raise their hands if they've seen that, comparing like their field, the same soil, to the neighbor's field. A tremendous amount of numbers of farmers across the room raised their hands if they had observed that too. And so I think that's what's really key to help drive and bring those of the academic persuasion to bring them along also as they realize that, hey, this is something real here. And farmers are seeing the benefits. And now that we've conducted a lot of the work, like on the economics, the business case for doing it, they see it makes them more profitable too. And one particular project where we interviewed 100 farmers, 93% said these soil health practices give them earlier access to their fields, like after a heavy rain. 97% of them said it helps them build resilience to extreme weather like drought.
97%.
97%.
That sounds like consensus.
It does, doesn't it?
Yes, it
Out
does.
of 100 farmers, just saying, hey, what's your opinion? They say, oh, yeah, yep.
Yeah, it does seem a pretty reliable theme. Is I hear farmers at the very beginning maybe a little resistant to trying some of these practices that build soil health, minimum tillage or no-till, cover crops. But I don't hear any farmers who try it and really give it a try after 4 or 5 years say, oh, that's a bunch of hooey. Like, right. It's almost universal. Yeah. Once they figure out some of the nuances of the practices and technical aspects of the practices, they almost 100% of the time see the positive outcomes.
Yeah, I've never spoken with a farmer that says that they would ever go back.
Yes. So all of that to say, you at USDA during that really pivotal time in changing the conversation about soils, and then was the founding CEO of the Soil Health Institute, which has quickly, just in 10 years, become the leader, not just here in the U.S., but nationally or internationally in soil health. Tell us about SHI, what the organization is, what you do, what your your work has led to.
Yeah. But it's the Institute is a nonprofit. We have a mission of safeguarding and enhancing vitality. There's that living word, the vitality and productivity of soils. And we do that in a number of ways. But the bottom line is that we provide the scientific information on soil health and then translate it into ways that will benefit farmers, so then they can adopt, what we've learned, then brings greater environmental benefits to the rest of society. And so we do work that is, and like research, that is very scientifically sound, but then that's not our end game. We're just starting in many respects. Even though we publish in like peer-reviewed technical journals and things like that, that's not our end game. We then take that information and make sure that we translate it and deliver it so that farmers, ranchers can benefit from it. So that's kind of the bottom line of what we do. And so our goal is to get greater adoption, but then we do that by focusing in on what farmers tell us they need to know when they're deciding whether or not to adopt some new management practice. So that means we conduct work on the business case, because they have to know if it's going to be profitable or not, or increase or reduce economic risk. We focus in on the most effective measurements, so that they can assess, how well they're doing. We have an education outreach program to help provide the information they need when they're, considering a management change and adopting, some new practice. And then we have some research and development, the research into all of those things that I just mentioned. But the development aspect is like developing tools, like decision support tools to help them and stuff like that. So we have activities in all those areas.
And, obviously a lot of the work that you have done and SHI does is in row crop agriculture. But I imagine you all do other work as well in all facets. Can you give us an idea of the portfolio of the breadth of the work that SHI does?
Yeah. So much of our work is in the row crop, but in many, many different row crops. And that's not because we shy away from others, but being a nonprofit, we're just, kind of regulated to what we're doing and where we're doing it, what crops we're doing it with, by our funding, where we're able to get funding to do. And so, but yeah, we've basically been doing quite a bit of work all across North America, particularly in the U.S. and Canada. And but it is being felt around the world. There are organizations now that we've been training online to use some of the materials and information, like an app that we've developed for along with the University of Sydney in Australia, developed an app to allow farmers to help measure aggregate stability, which is where those sand, silt, and clay particles bind together to be aggregates, and that gives more porosity or more pore space. So now you get more water infiltrate in, more roots can penetrate the soil easier to take up nutrients. And so that's a really important measure. But so we've worked with University of Sydney in Australia to develop an app where farmers can do that in 10 minutes in their comfort of their own kitchen, for example. So that's kind of one of the development efforts that we worked on.
So you all are on the cutting edge of a lot of stuff as you look forward. And again, you're about to retire, which we'll talk about a little later before we end the show. But looking, what do you see? What are the things coming the next 10 years in soil health, specifically at SHI, that really get you excited?
Yeah, there is so much, and you have no idea how difficult of a decision it is to retire when you see so much opportunity and you want to continue making a difference and an impact. And but I have to be the first to acknowledge that in many ways I'm just the beneficiary of this. There's so many good people and farmers that have worked with us, with our staff members, our chief scientific officer that comes in beaming with new ideas all the time, and all of our people, and our educators, that are all passionate about getting it into the hands of farmers. I mean, I'm just many respects, the beneficiary of having such great, passionate people, that that are equally committed to the effort as I am. And so some of the things that we're working on now, one in particular is just it's amazing to me. It makes the hair stand up on my arms when I talk about it. It's called soil health benchmarks. Maybe it doesn't sound too exciting, but the reality is...
I'm interested.
The reality is that farmers may not know how healthy their soils can become. If they've been getting a decent yield, making a decent profit, they may not realize how degraded their soil is. I mean, if we've been farming the same soil over and over for generations and generations, chances are it's become quite degraded also in terms of the soil health aspects. A lot of research shows that, a few decades of using some of these conventional practices, you'll lose half the organic matter, half the carbon in the soils. And so that's really, really critical for improving soil health. So the bottom line is that we've developed this process where we can establish how healthy different soils can become. And so we are using that to help farmers interpret where they are on that continuum. And we've now this is beyond a proof of concept. Now we've done it on 19 million acres, and we've developed over 500 reports for farmers showing them within your local region, because all this is local. It has to be for it to be correctly interpreted. We don't want to compare a silt loam in Texas to same expectations of a silt loam in Iowa just because they're both silt loams. That's not appropriate. So we do things in a really local region, like a subsection of Georgia, for example, where we establish for these soils here, how healthy can those soils get? What's their capacity? And but then we can sample farmers' fields and show them where they are. For those doing really conventional practices, they're usually down at one end of the spectrum. From those using like no-tillage and cover crop practices, they're usually intermediate between the lower end and how good that soil can get. So we can show that now to farmers where they are and show them that capacity of that soil, like, for example, to increase its available water holding capacity. And that means resilience to drought. And what that does is it can help motivate, farmers to try new practices, to stick with them, because they know that soil has that capacity, and they recognize droughts becoming, increasingly widespread, and so is heavy rain at different times, and building soil health, can help them be more resilient through that. So I'm really excited about that. As I said, we've done it now on 19 million acres, which is great, but that's only a fraction of what we need to do it on, right? And so I really feel like in the next 10 years, that's going to be a major emphasis, is beefing that up, getting more of that into the hands of farmers. We're really excited about something that we're working on now, which is a kind of a producer portal where farmers can have access to information, like they can go online, something like a Google Earth interface, and draw a box around their farm. And then they're provided information on what that most local information is on the business case for using soil health practices, the benchmarks, how healthy their soils can become, where they can find information on ways to measure it, how they can practices, for improving it, that type of information. So that's where we really want to go, is, just being able to deliver more of this information to farmers. So that's going to really be, stepping up in the next several years too, as we get it built out.
Before we keep digging in, farmers should hear about Farmers for Soil Health. It's a program established by farmers for farmers, dedicated to improving soil health practices like cover crops to enhance the environment and profitability of farmers. Through this podcast, which is a partnership with the Soy Checkoff, Port Checkoff, and the National Corn Growers Association, we dig deep into sustainable farming practices. We're here to bring you tangible, experience-based, and research-backed information that can help you enhance your land and your bottom line. If you're enjoying it so far, check out this podcast, our past episodes, and the ones that are coming. And Wayne, we had a past episode that really highlights something you said earlier, and that is, you said, a lot of farmers don't know what it's like to farm healthy, vibrant soils because some of our soils have been so depleted. We had a farmer on the show earlier, Michael Thompson from Kansas, and he talked about using, taking over his family operation and using minimum tillage or no-till cover crops and grazing and diverse cover crops to simulate kind of the natural processes that built those soils, and how fast the soils recovered, and like how much of an eye-opening experience it was to farm soils that were healthier. But it seems like to get farmers to really incorporate these, as you said, y'all are doing this great research. We've got to get that information into farmers' hands in ways that they can understand and use in their operations. One of the things I'm really interested in is science communication. The world keeps getting more and more complex. As science advances, our knowledge is expanding exponentially, which is great. But that complexity can sometimes be a barrier to making management decisions. Complexity can be a death blow to making good management decisions. Yeah. You and your career have spent a lot of time doing science, but also translating science to farmers. What do you think are some of the keys that we need to, what do we need to keep in mind in communicating with farmers about things like soil health practices that gives them the information they need, but also simplifies it to a point they can actually make decisions on the ground?
Yeah. I would say that is a continuous challenge, and it is something that I continually challenge myself to do and continually challenge the staff at the Soil Health Institute to do. And a lot of it comes down to understanding the fact that farmers are making a business decision here. This is their livelihood. And if you present something that's not understandable, then why would they invest in it? If somebody was trying to sell me something and I didn't even understand it, then I'm not going to buy it. Yes. And so I just think that it's really up to us, particularly in the science world and the people and the educators that are working with farmers, to recognize that farmers are businessmen and women and they need to be able to make a profit. And so this has to be kind of framed, also within that context of how this is going to help them, for example, not just improve soil health for the sake of soil health, but how this is going to help them build resilience to drought and what that means for having more stable yields, and what that means for protecting their investments and the inputs that they put in, because now those inputs are not going to be washed away to the streams. And when it's washed away to the streams, well, then guess what? Now more regulators are starting looking at agriculture and as an issue. So all these things kind of can be addressed through soil health. And so I just feel like that it's just really important to kind of look at those end goals, recognize farmers are businessmen and women, but think of it in terms of how it benefits their bottom line, how it benefits their productivity and long-term resilience.
Yeah, and you're right. It is an ongoing issue. It's going to become a bigger and bigger issue as the science continues to advance, as our understanding grows, as the complexity grows. Being able to distill that into the pieces of information that farmers need to know is going to be an ongoing challenge for us, I think, in agriculture. And that communication piece, I think, is equally as important as the science.
I agree. And I think that we just need to be really adamant about engaging farmers at an early stage on what we were doing and what we were finding, and hear what questions that they have so that we can then tailor that information in ways that are most beneficial for them.
Yeah. So with this communication piece, I want to pitch you the last, maybe the last question. Yeah. As I've gotten into this space, one of the questions I like to ask people a lot is, I talk to farmers who tell me cover crops are so important to my operation that if that tool was taken away, I don't think I could farm successfully anymore. That's one end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
The other end of the spectrum are farmers who say, I tried the damn things and there will never be another cover crop planted on my farm. Mm-hmm. How do you explain the difference between these two ends of the spectrum?
Yeah.
And what would you say to the farmers that maybe are on the skeptical end of the spectrum let's just talk about one specific practice, and that's cover crops.
Yeah. Yeah. I put it this way. There's a saying that if you think you can, you can. But if you think you can't, you're right. Yes. And so I'm not saying that that's always the case when it comes with cover crops. There are some legitimate constraints or barriers. Like, for example, as you move into the more semi-arid region, if a cover crop can be on there too long, then sometimes it can take up moisture that could impact your following main crop, right? In those places with limited moisture. So these are some legitimate, like, biological reasons. But my experience and observation is so many times it comes down to somebody wanting to make it work or not being totally committed to it. And the cover crop example is a really good one, because let's look at two cases. Someone just broadcasts cover crop seed 2 or 3 weeks before the frost in the fall. In the spring, early spring, they terminate it. Maybe they've gotten this much growth, the cover crop. Compare that to someone else that maybe plants a barley crop and interseeds clover in that barley. When they harvest their barley, late summer, early fall, now that clover is already well established. Now it's released to all the sunlight. Now it can really take off and bring in all kinds of additional benefits. And maybe that farmer even waits a bit in the spring before they do whatever they're going to terminate that cover crop. In both of those cases, those two farmers have checked the box that they're growing cover crops.
Yes.
But they're having very, very different impacts on the soil, bringing very, very different, benefits. So it's not just doing the practice, yes or no, but it's how well you're doing it and how well you're thinking of yourself as a soil health manager. Are you managing that soil to bring those benefits, to the health of that soil? And when you do that, then that's when you really see, those benefits that will come through in ways of drought resilience, yield stability, and enhanced profitability, all those things.
So Wayne, to connect these two dots between the farmer who just could not farm without them to the ones who don't want to touch them ever again, to bring those farmers into the fold, obviously it's going to take a lot of communication and education. And that's a big part of what SHI does. It's a big part of what we're doing together in Farmers for Soil Health. Could you talk a little bit about your work in helping gear those farmers up for the future to use, cover crops in their operations?
Absolutely. Yeah, we use a process that many other organizations also use, and we're really, excited and really proud to be working with Farmers for Soil Health on this project. And that process is where we find farmers that are already very successful at using these practices. We give them a very modest stipend to be a mentor to other local farmers. They will host a field day on their farm. And we usually just then give the microphone to them. And so, they have credibility that we don't have because they are making a living, at it, and we're not. And so this is a process that we use, that we establish these networks of farmers, and we have a mentor that can basically kind of be the central hub, share their phone number with other farmers. So, for example, if you get a spring that's wetter than normal, then they can pick up the phone and ask them about, this, should I terminate the cover crop now or wait, and that way they don't have to go through as much trial and error. They can, kind of talk to that mentor. And so that's kind of the process we use in our education programs. Right now we have 14 farmer mentors around the country. I know that's just a drop in a bucket to what we need. But being a nonprofit, we can only do what we, get grant funding for. And so, but that's the approach that we use, and obviously, of course, that we're working on together in the Farmers for Soil Health using that same approach.
Well, Wayne, I got into conservation for two reasons. The first one, everybody who goes into conservation goes into it for, is that I wanted to conserve natural resources. I love the outdoors. I love nature. I also want to eat every day. So, figuring out how to incorporate conservation to preserve and conserve natural resources while also preserving working landscapes, really important to me. But the other reason I got into it is I met people like you, and the people that work in conservation are a different breed. Like, they come to work for different reasons than bankers. No offense to bankers out there. Right. But we are passionate. Wayne, I appreciate you so much for the leadership you've given to soil conservation and soil health and all of the influence you've had over your career. Just really appreciate you. By the time this episode airs, you may be retired, or you'll be right on the cusp of retirement. What are your plans? What are you going to be doing with your time?
Well, a couple of most immediate plans. The most immediate, have a very old dog, 13-year-old dog, so I hope to be there to help her through her transition. But beyond that, I plan on getting a small camper top for my truck, building a platform for a bed in the back of it, and I have a lot of places that I want to hike. And so I'm planning on doing a lot of that, a lot of sightseeing, going to national parks and doing a bit of boondocking, trying to just kind of really get back out into the woods quite a bit.
That's a fantastic goal for retirement. We've not really explored this area of mutual interest. I'm an outdoors person. I spent the New Year's time, we're just coming out of the holidays, hiking over in the Ozarks in Arkansas. So we'll have to compare notes about favorite places to go.
That sounds great.
Wayne, it's been a real pleasure having you join. Thank you so much for your contributions to the field. Best of luck in retirement. Maybe we can get together and get on a trail sometime.
Sounds like a lot of fun, and
I'll sneak the bourbon into your backpack when you're not looking.
Yeah, I'll feel the weight of it in there probably, but yeah. So I guess I just want to make sure that it's really clear that, I guess I feel like I'm just kind of a beneficiary of so many good people, so many good supporters, friends, other people like you and others that are dedicated to the conservation movement, but having really good staff and stuff. In many ways, I've just kind of feel like I've been the beneficiary of their passion and good ideas too.
Well, Wayne, thank you for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. And those of you listening, this conversation has been your kind of thing. Make sure to rate our podcast, follow us on social media, and check out our website, farmersforsoilhealth.com. And of course, stay tuned here for more insights on sustainable farming practices. Until next time.